Well, hello, and this is the Lenten study on the Psalms, beginning with the Psalms of Ascent in Psalms 120 through 134. And today we'll start with 123. As you know, these were songs that were sung by the pilgrims, people going on pilgrimage to Jerusalem for one of the yearly festivals. They had 3 yearly festivals. And this would have been a journey for many if they lived in Israel. Could be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, maybe even more. There would have been people who would have been a part of the diaspora or the dispersion of Israel, and they might have lived in Greece. They might have lived in what is now modern Turkey, or maybe into North Africa, and they'd be coming maybe for once in a lifetime to go to Jerusalem and see the temple. And they would have been singing these psalms as they did. And it would have been important. If they had come by sea and landed in the port city of Caesarea in the north, it was at least a 5-day journey on foot, maybe even more. For Jesus from Nazareth in the Galilee, it was probably a 3 or 4-day journey. And there would have been a lot of risk to that. Maybe people trying to take them or trying to find enough provisions, or bandits coming. So they travel in large groups. And that was really helpful. They may have had pleasant experiences of fellowship, but they might have had unpleasant experiences, tax collectors, toll takers. And even in Jerusalem, some of the temple officials would have treated them arrogantly, scoffed at their accent because they weren't the urbane Jerusalemites. They would have been apprehensive on the journey. And so these psalms were a way of connecting in community with God and trusting in God. So in this 10-minute study, we're going to study Psalms 123, 4, 5, and 6. I'll ask you to do 127 on your own. We'll start with 123, and I'll read it. I lift my eyes to you, whose throne is in the heaven. As the eyes of a servant look to the hand of their master, and the eyes of a maid to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to God, our Lord, till he shows us mercy. Have mercy on us, O Lord, have mercy on us, for we have endured much contempt. We have endured much ridicule from the proud, much contempt from the arrogant. Well, the psalmist imagery is of a servant before a caring master or mistress who has confidence to approach their employer with complete trust. And because their relationship of one is of trust and readiness, because they want to be a good person for their employer, they hope to be treated kindly in return. They transfer that to God. They hope to be good servants of God, and they trust that God will hear their prayer in God's steadfast love. That word steadfast is wonderful in the Psalms. It's the Hebrew word chesed, and it's the steadfast love of God that God doesn't quit caring and loving. Now, you may have had employers that really treated you kindly. You may have had officers whom you respected. You may have had some that you didn't. And you have to process that, because sometimes we transfer that over to our relationship with God. Do you approach God with apprehensive fear or with trust? And for this kind of journey, it would be one of trust, one hopes, and I think that's what they experienced. And of course, they may even have had arrogant treatment by some of the temple officials. And they've endured a lot of contempt, and that would not be much fun. And as you think about it, you might think about, have you ever had an experience of inhospitality in the church? I have. I watched one time, and I was powerless to do anything about it because it was part of a program where people were free to say whatever, and it just broke my heart to see such inhospitality by church people, because they're trusting in God, and those who are the arrogant, well, it's all ego. So Psalm 124 is also a lovely psalm, and I really like this. There's even a chorus, a very jazzy chorus that begins, if the Lord had not been on our side, and that's how this psalm begins, Psalm 124. If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been our side when men attacked us, when their anger flared against us, they would have swallowed us alive. The flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. And you can see the alliteration there that is building up in the poetry of the Psalms. Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird out of the fowler's nets. The net has been broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. So this is a psalm born out of trust from their experience with God. Many times Israel had faced invasion and subjugation to foreign powers, godless powers, and they always remembered God's faithfulness and promises. Sometimes we play what-if games in our mind with a situation, and we can get really carried away and become even more afraid. And the media does this all the time to us. And this is not a what-if game. This is, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, well, then this would have happened, but it didn't. And then, of course, I really love the last line in this Psalm 124, where it says, our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Let's go to Psalm 125. Now, Jerusalem is in the middle of 7 hills, and Mount Zion, where the temple had stood, was on the highest Mount Zion, of course, being one of the 7 hills there. And it was an inspiring sight. And you would see the city all around it, but you would see the temple on Mount Zion gleaming white in Jesus' day. It was Herod's temple. He had built this glorious temple. He had taxed the daylights out of the people to do it, but it was their temple and they loved it. And the pilgrims, as they would come from the north or the south going up to Jerusalem, they would have seen this and they would have been inspired. And so this is how it goes. It is actually also sung as a chorus, too. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken but endures forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people, both now and forever. The scepter of the wicked will not remain over the land allotted to the righteous, so they're standing on God's promise. For then the righteous might use their hands to do evil. Do good, O Lord, to those who are good, to those who are upright in heart. But to those who turn to crooked ways, Lord, banish them with evildoers. Peace be upon Israel, shalom upon Israel. And that's a lovely psalm. Now, they would have seen a lot going on as they were traveling for one of the many festivals. They would have seen a lot of people all around the city, going to and fro into the markets and doing whatever. They would have looked at the temple and seen pilgrims going there. They would have seen rabbis teaching on some of the steps that are there. They would have seen temple priests going on and the daily sacrifices, and it would have been quite inspiring. And there's this intimacy there of God's arms that surround Jerusalem. And the Lord cradles them in those arms. Now tonight, when you go to bed, just have this thought. What is it like for the Lord to cradle me in his arms now and forever? I think that's a lovely image. Let's go to the 126th Psalm, which goes, when the Lord brought back the captives to Zion, we were like men who dreamed. Our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are filled with joy. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the streams in the Negev. Those who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying their sheaves with them. Well, the opening line refers to the return of Israel from their captivity, which would have been around 515 BCE. The Babylonians had carried them away, destroyed the city. They lived in Babylon, and then, of course, they were allowed to come back under Cyrus, the Persian who had conquered Babylon. And when they did, it was like a dream coming back. And I think of the people who survived the Holocaust in the 1940s and then were repatriated to Israel, where they would begin a new life, and they could go there where their ancestors had lived their lives, where their ancestors had had to leave, and now they were coming back, and the fortunes of these people had turned to something good. This sense of restoration on a grand scale is really essential to the psalm. Now, they're the seed of Israel, the seed of God's people, but there's a farming metaphor here that when you got your harvest, then you put away seed for the next season. But as the winter went on before the spring planting season, you were running out of food, and that seed looked pretty tempting, but if you used it, you'd have nothing to plant with. So they would go and they'd plant their seed with tears, but when the harvest came, they'd carry the sheaves with great joy. And this is about a disciplined life and a disciplined sense of life. So having a disciplined life is really very significant to a spiritual life, to have those disciplines that help us deepen and keep in check those other things that would lead us astray. I'm going to ask you to read the 127th Psalm on your own, and you can write to me at kerygma5@yahoo.com. That's KERYGMA5@yahoo.com, and let me know what you're thinking. So have a wonderful day and a significant Lent, and we'll be back.